Justice or adl is one of the most important attribute of Islam, and there are many places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about the justice. If there is no justice in the society, we know that there is no harmony, no peace, and there is all over the chaos. People are mistrusting each other. So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran mentioned about that upholding the justice in the society. So this is an obligation being a Muslim for us. It's not something sunnah is first on us. So that's why this panel is very important, and upholding the justice, key to the successful society. And I want to invite three important panelists here who has to come and discuss on this important topic. But before that, I want Isra, you want to say something? You want to? Okay. So let me call you one of our first panelist, who is very well known, and mashallah, I know him from many years, and he's one of my favorite person. I call him several times on a TV program as well. And Dr. Zahid Bukhari. Dr. Zahid Bukhari is the Executive Director of Center of Islam and Public Policy. His research focus on Islam in the West, Muslim public opinion, and interfaith relation in the United States. Dr. Zahid Bukhari, please welcome him. And my next guest in the previous session is also here. He was, and mashallah, I know him. He's a great revered Muslim and a great leader in our community. CEO of NCCM, Stephen Brown. Please, I welcome. Please, comes to the stage as well. And our third guest is the Executive Director at Justice for All Canada, Human Rights Educates, and Personal Growth and Leadership Trainer in our society as well. We all know him. We see him many places. Brother Taha Ghayyur, please welcome to the stage as well.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Isra, and today I will be just starting this discussion of our panel. So as I'm asking you a series of questions, and as I'm proposing them to you, any one of you can kind of like chime in regarding the matter. So let's start for the first question. So there's various definitions and implications of how individuals define social justice, human rights, and political rights. How do you define these terms? And what do these terms mean to you?
Assalamu alaikum. Excellent question. We can look at sort of the technical definition. So human rights, basically, you have the Charter of Human Rights, and there are different rights that people have. And in the modern world, especially post World War II, we've, as a society, internationally, we've decided which rights belong to all people. Right, and we call those human rights. And then a lot of what we consider social justice is the attempt to enact those human rights in a particular country. In our country, Canada, that takes a different flavor than in other countries. So I think that's an idealized version of it. But when we see on the ground, what does social justice look like today? Unfortunately, a lot of what it looks like is a competition. It seems like a competition between different groups trying to one-up one another, or a competition, even philosophically, of what it means to be oppressed, what it means to be emancipated, what kind of society should we live in. And so it's a really complex term. I think that is, and the definition of that term is...
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. About the social justice, I think we can define the Western term, but I think in the Quranic terminology, in Surah Al-Hadid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, just the translation quickly, I'm saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent all messenger, not only Rasul Akram sallallahu alaihi wasallam, all messenger with clear evidence, with scriptures, with mizan. Why? People affairs could be maintained on justice. So that was the purpose of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is explaining. That was the purpose He sent all messenger. So in that way, I think the relationship with human being and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, human being with other human being, and human being with the nature. Over there, if the balance is not there, that is injustice. And that's the issue of social justice becomes, especially in America and Canada, and I'll talk about the USA basically. The human connection, the relationship with one human with other human, if it is on discrimination, if it is on hate, if it is thinking that I am superior, other group are very inferior, that issue of racism, that issue of all those, whatever, that becomes the social justice issue. And then we can think about some other direction also. But that is the basic, I think, term from the Quranic where we thought that because the whole universe was established and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent all messenger, that the affair should be established on justice.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulil kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So not to repeat what my co-panelists just mentioned, there's an interesting quote by Nelson Mandela. He said to deny people their human rights is to challenge their very humanity. And that is, I think, the essence that we need to keep in mind. And I think Stephen just referred to a very foundational document that I think we should all be aware of. And it surprises me that most of us perhaps have never even read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is a very critical foundational document. And it came about as part of the human rights movement in the aftermath of Second World War and the Holocaust. And this was adopted in 1948 by the United Nations General Assembly. And it actually has 30 articles of 30 basic human rights that are so critical, that are so inalienable, so fundamental, that no human being should ever be denied. And you know, as Stephen was saying, that it is unfortunate, it is sad how much double standards there are around the world and how it is applied. So if you look at globally, you know, we talk about human rights of certain nations and certain people at the expense of others. If you think about even, for instance, very specifically, a cause that is very close to my heart. How many people remember the boat people? Anybody who knows what I'm talking about, the boat people? We're talking about Rohingya people. So in 2016, 2017, 2018, when you start seeing, 2017, 2018, when you start seeing these boat people stranded in the middle of nowhere. The world was silent. These people were starving. They would rather jump into the water and kill themselves than to starve. And I have talked to the survivors of some of these people, some of these boat people, right here in Canada. And I can tell you some of these heartbreaking stories. And what was more heartbreaking was the fact that there were all these countries that were watching, neighboring countries watching, and did nothing and let them die. Why I'm mentioning this? Because this is one of the fundamental 30 rights that are enshrined in this document that we were just talking about. That if you see anyone stranded on a boat in the middle of sea, in the middle of water, it is that nation's responsibility to, at the least, to go and rescue them. But we failed so many Rohingya people. Until this day, immigrants from Africa, we hear this almost every week, a story of a boat drowning. And we are not doing our job as individuals, as countries, and even as Muslims to stand up for these basic human rights that are essentially Muslim rights and prophetic rights as well.
Jazakallah khair, and mashallah. So we define now that what's the human rights and what it's meaning to all of us, right? So my next questions to Dr. Zahid Bukhari is starting from you, that how we Muslim uphold justice in a multi-religion and diverse society. Because we have a scripture, Quran, alhamdulillah, for guidance for us, But there are many people who are in our community, diverse culture is there, diverse religion is there. They don't accept those things. We accept. So how we have to do, uphold this justice in this society?
The Muslims, I think I have discussed with Arab before also. Muslims are relatively new kid on the block in USA and Canada. And we were very much concerned about ourselves. For initially, they are concerned about themselves, and then the establishing places of worship. Then taking care of their children. That's the second stage. Second stage was taking care of back home, sending money back home. Then got married, children, taking care of their children, the Islamic school and all those things. Then their own issues. But then ultimately, when the community is getting more strong, more mature, more secure, then they will take part in the issue of the society. So the question you are asking, that is very relevant right now with the Muslim. Yes, they have been crossing those stages very quickly. Once we were discussing in one of the newspapers in New York with the editorial board, and we described, that was some years ago, so we were describing Muslim situation. One of the person from the editorial board said, what I heard from you about Muslim, you are on that stage when American Jews were in 1920s. But we told them that Muslims are catching up very swiftly. So yes, Muslims have to cross all those stages very quickly, but now they should understand that the only talking about or looking for justice only for Muslim is not enough. No, we have to stand up for everybody here. Muslim issues, not only hijab and discrimination and something, no. If any inner city violence is going on, if any other, like in America, blacks and Spanish, they are 28 or 29% of the population. But in American prison, there are 2.3 million people in the American prisons. 59% they are blacks or Spanish. 29% of the population, 59% in the prison population.
I think something that Muslims have that we can really contribute to this society is teaching society how to re-engage with the concept of justice. Being a social justice warrior has almost become an insult in North American society, and there's a reason for that, right? Like, I'll give you an example. When I was in university, my employer invited somebody to come speak to the school about African American rights and the civil rights struggle, and they invited all the employees on work hours to go to this speech. And one of my colleagues, I was the president of the labor union at the time, and one of my colleagues comes to me and says, Steve, do you know that apparently there's this rule that says that white people have to sit at the back? I was like, no, I know our employer is very, interested in social justice, but it was true. They had put it on Facebook. And when I went to go speak to my employer about it, they said, number one, white people can't be racist. White people can't be victims of racism because they're white. And the second thing that they said was, you don't understand what racism is. You should come to the speech and we will teach you. And, this is a 22-year-old girl with blonde hair and blue eyes that's explaining this to me. And so, this idea of there's justice for some, not for others, that we should treat people differently, that some rank higher on the totem pole of oppression than others, that we get to choose when we're just and we're not, it flies in the face of what justice is. And so from a Muslim perspective, and agreeing 100% with what you said, Doctor, coming from the perspective of we're all God's children, we all have the right to dignity, we should all be treated equally, and that we have a responsibility to fight injustice and unfairness wherever we see it for everybody, is a real opportunity for us to contribute to society based on who we are and our fundamental principles. So I think that's a real opportunity for us to contribute, and it's a core piece of why we as a Muslim community are absolutely essential to American and Canadian culture right now.
Thank you so much for your comprehensive answers on that question. Brother Taha, I wanted to pose this question to you, but I'll give you a little bit of a background on it before I ask. Many think that we live in a fortunate society. Well, that may be true in some sections and in some sectors of our society. I think that unfortunately our society is embedded. The social fabric has become embedded with social inequities and social injustices. Now, can you speak on some visible injustices that you have seen in Canada or in North America based on your line of work?
Great, thank you very much. Actually, I'm going to build on what you both said and going into what you were asking me about. One of the most liberating ideas for me in reconciling this idea that you, as a Muslim, should also be speaking for the rights of others was when I came to learn from one of my teachers that, and it's in Islamic tradition, by the way, according to the traditional scholars in the past, they listed 3 areas where Muslims do not discriminate. We should not discriminate ever, regardless. But specifically 3 areas that you do not discriminate. Meaning, if you are in any of these situations, you make sure that you are in the front line doing something about it. Number 1 is taking care of your neighbors. And we know so many ahadith of the Prophet ﷺ about 40 neighbors around you, 40 neighbors behind you, in front of you, beside you, all that, right? That's one thing. So your neighborhood, and this is what we're talking about right now. Number 2 is taking care of the poor and the needy. You do not discriminate when somebody's hungry, somebody's in need. We never discriminate and should never do that. And Prophet ﷺ has always taken care of the destitute in his society, Muslims and non-Muslims. And the 3rd is administration of justice. Somebody is going through injustice. It does not matter whether you're Muslim or not. And I think this was so liberating when I heard this, because you keep hearing this idea, in the Muslim community, when you talk about sometimes segments in our community and society, let's say indigenous people who have gone through for centuries and till this day do not have clean water. You do not have, access to affordable food, for instance, access to healthcare and education, literally an hour away, at reserves an hour away from here. So when you hear that, when you talk about indigenous peoples, for instance, you get this pushback at times. And what about the Muslims who are being, killed in this part of the world? And what about this and what about this? Well, another principle of justice we need to keep in mind as Muslims especially is that we never compare the suffering of people. We never. I work on about 4 or 5, actually 6 different campaigns, global campaigns on human rights on different issues. Rohingya, Uyghur Muslims, Kashmir, Indian Muslims, Palestine. But we never compare what's happening to this community is the same or different from the other, ever. So coming back to local issues, their indigenous peoples is so critical that as Muslims living in this part of the world, that we recognize whose lands we are on and what we owe it to the indigenous peoples right here. Because they are the generous hosts of this land. So this is one area that we need to take serious responsibility of. Second is Black community. Black community, we continue to see systemic racism and discrimination that Black people continue to face. You ask a Black person, what they go through. I actually, because I'm not Black, I had to actually ask some of my Black friends, what is it like to actually drive on the street? A Black male, young 30, 20 something year old, what is it like to actually drive on the street? And I was told by many of them, if not all of them, that you do not know how much fear we have every single time we drive on the streets, because you never know which cop out of nowhere will actually stop you for no reason. And this is a reality of so many young people, young Black people. And I mean, we can go on and on and on about this, but almost every racialized community has gone through and will continue to go through. But Black people and indigenous peoples are the allies that we need to work with and ensure that we stand up for them especially when we're expecting other people to stand with us.
So the next question is a very important question, and this is one of the survey that in a survey 42% of Canadians think discrimination against Muslim is mainly their fault. What does this survey reflect? And how we can change this perception of the host society, because they are thinking the Muslims are themselves on this fault, that the discrimination was going on in the society. 42% is thinking that. that Muslim are themselves on this. They are the cause. They are creating that causing.
That's a good question. I mean, if it wasn't obvious, because my name is Steve, I wasn't always a Muslim before. And I can tell you, you're absolutely right. When people that are not Muslims think about who Muslims are, almost everything that they think of and almost everything that they know is fundamentally wrong. They think that Muslims are very different from other people in Judeo-Christian civilization. Not true. They think that Muslims are boring. Not true. They think that Muslims are violent. Not true. So there's so many things that they think of. And when I was first studying Islam, what surprised me as a young black person was just how non-violent Muslims were. Because if the same thing was happening to us, right, we might not have been so patient. And so, what I'm trying to say is the following. One of the main reasons why I think there's so much ignorance about Muslims in society is because there's so much distance between Muslims and non-Muslims. We don't spend enough quality time together, right? If you are a non-Muslim and you hear for years and years and years negative stereotypes about Muslims, then when somebody actually does come to you and gives you a different perspective, your mind is probably not open to it. The first thing that we need to do is be deliberate about building close relationships with people that are not Muslims. I cannot tell you how important that is. Second, we have to create nexuses of shared experiences. Muslims are huge foodies. We love food. We talk about food. Where's the next halal joint and what's going on, and right? We never share any of this, right? We don't share our culture with other people. How many people know some random singer from the United States in some state we've never been before? How many people in your neighborhood know something fundamental about your culture? Go out of your way and share your culture. It is fantastic. After I became a Muslim, 11 years later, my father became a Muslim. My brother became a Muslim. My uncle became a Muslim. It's not because I was special. It's because of It's because of the people they spent time with. I remember my dad saying, I'm around Muslims, they're never lying to me, they're never cheating, they're not swearing, they're not messing around on their wives, right? They're honest in their business transaction. They have money to go out and do interesting things because they're not spending it on drinking. They have a great culture. They're wonderful people to be around. Start with that. And when you do that, then talk about who you are. Then talk about why you do what you do. Watch the things change.
But one thing I like to mention that don't worry about these surveys because it's a very interesting. We actually in the USA we did some experiment. 2 experiments. During Donald Trump's first campaign in 2016, he made continuously remarks against Muslims. Continuously, he was against banning Muslim, immigrant, Islam, Muslim. Other Republican candidates are making all those comments. University of Maryland, one professor, their research institute, they did 4 national surveys during that year. And then he wrote a piece, his op-ed piece in Washington Post in February 17. And he wrote that during 2016, when Republican, their bashing of Muslims were increasing, American public opinion was more in favor of Islam and Muslims. So that piece was written in Washington Post. So because as Stephen has said that, and Alhamdulillah, we have won these battles. Last 20, 23 years, we have won several battles. I was listening here, 10 member of parliament in 338. It is almost 3 point some %. So, but inshallah, we have 5% population. We will be having more
inshallah 17% at least with 5%, then we will have more. And local level, another level in academia, another, Muslims are progressing and it is being accepted. And if I think I will ask the survey, all those survey, those who are doing survey, if they are asking one general question about Islam and Muslim, ask one question, what about your neighbor Muslims? What is your impression about him? You know American style, when you ask about Congress, we hate Congress. When you ask your congressman, oh, he's very good, he's lovely, or she is very good member. That is exactly the dilemma. Muslim, there maybe they have generally opinion is very bad, but you ask your neighbor Muslim, your co-worker, oh, he is very good, she is very good. So that dilemma is there in public opinion. But I think, as he said, Stephen, we have to work more. We have to share our wonderful food, no question about that. So, but also our culture. And I think Muslims are doing their open houses, inviting Muslims, taking part in the local level campaigns. I think that is the, I feel like in September 11, before September 11, after that, we crossed one big river that from haram, voting haram, we are taking part in the American politics, Canadian politics, and yes, a lot of bad things, but we have been continuously taking part. Now I think what is going on in the society, we are crossing another bridge that we have to take part in the local level, grassroots level. That is the participation more necessary. School board, county board, in America, in American sense, I think we have to take part on that level, and also very proudly describing our faith. This is our faith position. I think that is the opportunity we are getting. Grassroots level participation, sharing our food and culture, but also saying that this is our faith and we are very proud of our faith on different issues. What is our position, inshallah ta'ala?
And that kind of leads to my second question, Brother Taha. I'm going to pose it to you, and the floor is open for all three of you, of course. There are a lot of political controversies and issues within our society that creates a difference of opinions among groups and individuals. And unfortunately, many of these issues are faced by our Muslim community living in various parts of Canada. Now, based on your positionality within the community, what is your perspectives on the issues faced by the Muslim community? And a follow-up to that would be, do you think these issues infringe on Muslim Canadian rights?
Man, that's a loaded question, a lot of stuff here. Let me start unpacking it. But I think what you're asking about is, of course, how do we ensure that we keep fighting for our rights while at the same time having competing rights, essentially, right? So I think the key is that we stay on message, number one, and we remain unapologetic about what are the fundamental rights we're talking about. What happens very often in these debates, as we can see in the current climate, even for instance in the education system and curriculum, for instance, debate that is happening, is that a lot of times we are not even aware as parents or as individuals exactly what it is that we are asking for. So we are concerned, I think we know the problem, but we are not very clear on pinpointing the actual solution for which we need to be advocating. So I think that clarity is very important, number one. And number two, being unapologetic about what it is once you decide to understand what it is. And then third is to frame this as a human rights issue. Frame this as a human rights issue, a basic fundamental religious belief issue, an issue that is critical for authorities or the government or whatever body you're advocating against to ensure that they accommodate our rights while also respecting other people's rights. Accommodating my rights does not mean we take away other people's rights, and honoring other people's rights should not be at the expense of my rights. And that is where it becomes challenging when we, as a community sometimes do not understand the difference, and we're not able to communicate to the authorities or to the politicians and the policymakers whom we want them to fight for. So I think these are the three things that come to mind. Maybe I'll let Brother Stephen to add more.
Thank you, Taha. Yeah, I agree. Whenever there are difficult issues to tackle, one of the first things I go to is a list of qul in the Quran, right? God is telling us to say something, There's probably a good reason for it. And one of the main one is lakum dinukum waliya din. To you your way and to me mine. The fundamental principle behind the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms is to live and let live. So to God belongs ultimate judgment of what is right and what is wrong. But we also, there's a really great quote from Diefenbaker, an ex-prime minister. Every Canadian citizen also has the right to define for themselves how they should live. Morality, what is right, what is wrong, what is bad, what is just, what is good, what is beautiful, what is ugly. All these things we have the right to define. That is what it means to be a Canadian citizen. And when we're talking about fundamental rights, rights are not primarily group rights, they're individuals, right? Canadian Muslims, just like everybody else, have the right to be treated as individuals. And whenever you're approaching complex political situations or social questions where there appears to be a competition of rights, I think that's the first thing you have to keep in mind. On the issue of the day where everybody's talking about a lot of gender issues or SOGI education in school, this is something that has really been an issue for a lot of members in our community. We've really been on the receiving end of this. In NCCM 2 years ago, in June, we had about 12 harassment complaints. Last year, we had over 400 in June alone. And what we're seeing is that Muslim children are becoming the victims of harassment when their parents are saying, maybe I don't have enough information about this. Maybe I want to create some distance while I try to make up my mind about this. What we're seeing is the kids are bearing the brunt of this at school. They're coming back and they're being harassed, sometimes by teachers and administrators. It's a real issue. At NCCM, we're really looking at it, and we're taking steps to address these issues on all levels, whether it's legal, government, education. But I think in terms of really looking at the higher principle, always remember that the fundamental aspect of the Charter and how it aligns with our primary values, to live and let live. And any time that we're able to achieve that, that is a win for our community and for us as individuals.
Thank you so much for that, Brother Stephen. And I like how you mentioned the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because that leads into my next question, which may pose to be a more controversial topic. But as Muslims, I believe we all know our stance on this, whether it's spoken verbally or whether we know it personally. So Muslims in various parts across the country believe that we don't belong, or that our voices aren't being heard. And this is true for many individuals and groups a part of our Muslim faith. We feel that our rights are being restricted, which creates fear to speak out. An issue that the Muslim community is facing is regarding the education curriculum. Having mandatory sex ed education or discussing gender ideologies in schools is an issue that the Muslim community is facing. Now, Muslims are not the only ones that are against this form of education, or they have opposing opinions. Many other individuals from various faiths have also spoken up about this issue. Since the government has made it mandatory for the curriculum to include sexual orientation education starting at grade 5, Muslims, especially Muslim parents, feel like they have to choose between their child's education or their religious beliefs. According to the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, all individuals should be able to express their religion freely. Now, how would you address this situation while preserving Muslim Canadian rights? And how should we approach such a controversial issue?
It's a big question to unpack. I would start by sort of going back to what you were saying. Some Muslims feel that there's a difference between the education of their children and the ability to be and their own convictions. Whenever there's an issue like that, what it really comes down to, like you said, is a charter question. And so, I think it's important that wherever we go, we make sure that we are able to live our lives as Muslims freely to the full extent of who we are, while maintaining other people's rights as well. I think a really important thing is not to get into a situation where you're having a conflict of rights between one community and another, right? That's really important. The other thing is really to look at what fundamentally is in fact happening, right? If kids are being harassed, if we're finding that your rights are being violated, then it's important to signal those issues, talk to somebody about it. If anybody wants to get in contact with NCCM, please do so. We've already received, especially just recently, hundreds of cases of harassment, and we're really looking at them and really looking at constructive ways of dealing with them on a systemic level. So I would say that that's really important. And the other thing that's important as well is to understand, look, there are people in society that do not share our perspective and our values on many of these key questions. And the government is going to doesn't just look at the 2 million Canadian Muslims, they look at the 40 million Canadians across the country. And so finding ways to be able to agree to disagree is necessary in any diverse society, right? And I think if we keep our mind on, if that's the way that we approach this issue, then we'll find constructive ways of dealing with these disagreements that allow us to ultimately be able to practice our faith and keep our kids safe. And that's ultimately what we want to do.
This issue is also a very burning issue among the Muslim community and also Christian community. This whole gender identity issue, sexual education in the schools and all those issues. So I live in Frederick, Maryland. So I think a couple of weeks ago in our masjid, our Christian organization came and they made a presentation and asked Muslims to participate in that. Basically, the argument is in the lines of religious freedom and also parents' rights. So we are talking about on those issues in this way. And I think Muslims, as I mentioned before, Muslims are also recognizing they have to, like, there are discussion going on, we have to have a member in the school board, education board in both counties. And it is all over going on all over the USA that we have to have our more representation in the education board, in the county commissioner or county executive over there, because all those things are being formulated, or maybe that, like over there, Democrat states and Republican states, they are behaving it differently. So Muslims are accordingly making that, and then I think this is a lot of discussion going on. Probably this time, several Muslims, and I don't know the exact percentage, probably on the reason of this way, they will be not voting for Democrats candidate, probably they will be voting for Republican candidate, even if he's a Donald Trump. So that type of thinking is going on. But watch out, I think that simple immediate reaction is also not good. We have to be a little bit more discussion going on. Whatever we gain in the Democratic, I'm talking about the American perspective. In Democrat, yeah, we understand they are very extreme liberal or extreme progressive, but Muslim community, they gain a lot of space over there. Republicans are not offering any space, but on that issue, their position is very much. So this is a dilemma for us, that how to navigate with that. Yes, navigation with the differences of as a theology or as a faith-based, that is a wonderful write-up came out from our scholars. But navigating in the political field is also very difficult choice. And I think recently we had in Dallas one meeting of Muslim leadership where scholars, activists, organization representatives were there. It is not very known meeting, a publicized meeting, but that discussion is going on. What should be our action item? What should be our political strategy? What should be our legal strategy? Because there are a lot of legal questions are also coming. And then what should be our social policy, or how to communicate with each other? So that work in progress, at least in America, that how to navigate politically, socially and legally this issue, and what should be as a consensus, what should we tell us of the community, the activists, and also how to work with the other faith group who are very much aligned with that position. So that is a challenge right now. And I think, but I'm very much hoping that the result will be Yes, they will be able to chalk out some course of action, but probably they are insisting or explaining our faith or position, and also taking part at the grassroots level, county and local level. I think that will be the result, inshallah, of all this struggle right now what's going on.
So I just want to ask Taha, starting with you, because this is important. Yesterday we have in our ICCM mosque, we invited 70 school and staff teachers. And there are very loaded questions are there in front of us. And one of the is the very important for me and for all the Muslim community, because they complain about two things. One thing is that the Muslim students, they are very harsh on the genders issue with the other pupils. And the second thing is they are misbehaving with the teachers who are coming to give some sort of the lecture on this. So how the parents have to deal this issue, and what they have to communicate their children on this specific issue. Because as Dr. Zahid Bukhari mentioned, that we have to think a lot that how we combat the situation.
Thank you for asking the question. Yeah, this is of course interesting. I mean, of course, I'm not aware of that specific situation, but we are aware of some of those rallies that we witnessed, where there were actions that actually took place that were not Islamic. Stomping somebody's flag or shouting out, statements that are hateful in nature are not Islamic. Is not an Islamic behavior. So, at the best, we need to, of course, educate our kids and our children and our family members that we have to be respectful of everybody, Muslim, non-Muslim, person you agree with and their lifestyle or not, whatever it may be. And more importantly, when you are in education system, which is supposed to be a safe environment, safe space, and on top of that, we're dealing with teachers. So of course, just like we are on the receiving end of a lot of brunt of these, of this fiasco that we're dealing with right now, where, as Brother Stephen mentioned, hundreds of children and parents have complained about being harassed as a result of taking a stance on this issue. Our reaction has to be simple, and that is our reaction has to be civil, and our reaction has to be Islamic. And I think this is a very fundamental duty that we need to teach. We need to, as we know from Islamic, our Islamic teachings, that we need to separate the actions from the individuals. As individuals, everybody's rights and human rights are important, and everybody should be respected. But when it comes to actions, I have the full right, fundamental full right, based on my faith, to completely disagree with respect, with honor, and with being a civil person. And I think that's very important. So again, if you're hearing these things, of course, that's unfortunate. But I also want to say one thing, not to make excuse for any of the behaviors and actions. A lot of parents and children even don't know how to respond, and they are angry because they're not being heard. We need to understand that, and this is also important, that so many stories we came to know personally, and I'm sure as an organization and as a person in community, I've heard personally over and over again. You go to the principal, you get ignored. You send an email, you get these blanket emails from them, basically, patronizing you or suggesting that you're basically homophobic when you are asking for simple requests, or asking a simple question like, what will be taught to my children in these classes, or my right to excuse, to opt out, for instance. So there is currently an environment of anger, which is understandable. That does not justify how some of these kids may be behaving, but it is important that we simply recognize that, because if we don't recognize that, it is going to get worse.
Yeah, and just to add on what Taha's saying, I completely agree. This also is, I think, a good example of us having to work together as a community. If you're doing it individually, you are going to get steamrolled. So at NCCM and working with many other leaders in the Muslim community, many other organizations, we've really been looking at how can we approach this issue in a more systemic fashion. because individuals are exactly what Taha is saying. They're talking to the principal, they're getting rebuffed. And so we are working with many institutions on bringing tangible solutions. And when we actually we're in the process of really looking at what those can look like and implementing those. And the goal is to be able to really work as a community together to be able to overcome some of these challenges, because I completely agree. It is an enormous issue for the community right now, and it's something that as leaders in the community, we have to bring workable solutions that works for our community in the context of us being Canadians.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight on to that really controversial issue, and maybe that Okay, so maybe we'll just start with a concluding question. So hopefully your commentary kind of sheds light and insight on how Muslim parents can, of course, deal with these issues at face value. And just our last question for this evening. Once you get into this type of research and this line of work, we start to realize how problematic a lot of things are within our country and within our society. For example, Canada depicts itself as a multicultural and diverse society. Whether that may be true at face value, when you compare it to the lived experiences of the citizens, of social members, that's not always true. So, leading into my question, Western societies claim to be more just than Muslim countries or Muslim societies, and these notions of justice could just, be there for show. Now, based on your experiences with public policy and policy analysis in general, how do you think we should contribute in establishing justice in Western countries, and do you think the interventions that have been implemented are effective?
Assalamu alaikum. On this one, it is really important to understand how modern Western societies function. If you think that you elect Uncle Trudeau and he goes to Ottawa and he's running the country, okay, that is not the way it works, okay? The people that run the country are interest groups, civil society that is able to work together. If there are elements of civil society or elements in society that have an interest in making sure that your life is more difficult, it's going to be that way. Unless you work with your people to make sure that that's not the case. So, once upon a time, there were people who looked like me who didn't have any rights, and that's because they didn't have invented, they needed free labor, right? There's a reason why Muslims right now are being maligned. It's good for votes. It's good for the weapons industry, right? It sells clicks. It sells newspapers. So in our society, the way to deal with this is to work together in a concerted fashion to push back government, media, legal, cultural. The more effective we are at doing that, the better it's going to be. It's not, in Canada, it is not just a question of morals and what should be. It's a question of what you can do. Your rights, you have them. They exist on paper, but they are only as good as your ability to defend them. So if you're feeling that, yeah, exactly. So if we're feeling that our rights aren't where they should be, then the first thing for us to do is to go, after we're done, go get some tea, go get some chai, and come up with a plan, right? And with the amount of doctors and engineers and lawyers and business owners and people who speak multiple languages, inshallah, I'm sure, we're going to get it done.
So that's wonderful. Now I just remember, I think, from Rasul Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's life, when he was not Payghambar, he did not receive Nabuwwat at that time, but in Makkah, he stood up for justice. When one trader came from Yemen or some other part of the Arab country, and he was behaved like some leaders of the Quraysh in a very unjustly, Rasul Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam stood up with other young 4, 5, 6 young people. They made Hilful Fadul. They made an agreement. We will be standing up for justice for that person. and they took that in their hand and they talked to that person and they resolved that issue. And after Nabuwa, he moved to Medina Munawwara. So once it was asked to Rasul Akram Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he said, again, I am ready to do that type of helpful fudud. I think as you say, we have to stand up for others, then definitely, inshallah, we will be able to have, others will be standing up for you, and there will be justice in America and in Canada, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much. Wonderful what you all said. You know, building on what Dr. Zahid just mentioned, remember 3 C's of prophetic success strategies, and those are care for humanity.
Thank you, everyone. And on that note, we are going to conclude this session. So thank you so much for actively listening, and thank you to our panelists for engaging in our creative discussion and answering those questions for us. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.